Welcome. Good morning and welcome to our ongoing text-based Tanya class for advanced students.
Yay, that's me.
Okay, so just to catch us up without trying to go through everything that we've done in the past few months, but we started off in chapter 1 mentioning that in the Gemara it describes 5 levels or 5 personae, 5 personality types. A complete tzaddik, an incomplete tzaddik, a complete rasha, an incomplete rasha, and a beinoni. And you notice I don't translate those words because what do you want to translate tzaddik as righteous? It doesn't do it justice. You want to translate rasha as wicked? Doesn't do it justice. Beinoni, you want to translate it as intermediate? Doesn't do it justice. But basically, we're examining who these personalities are. We haven't yet figured out what we are or what we can be. We didn't do that yet. We're just getting the parameters, so to speak. Now, last week we did chapter 10.
11.
And in chapter 10, actually took us 2 weeks, but we finished chapter 10 last week. We spoke about the level, the type of person called a tzaddik. And within tzaddik, we spoke about 2 levels of tzaddik. Tzaddik v'toivloi, tzaddik v'raloi, which is also called tzaddik gomer, tzaddik she'eino gomer. And without getting into the particulars, because this is just review, without getting into the distinction between the 2 levels of tzaddik, just tell me basically what's a tzaddik.
No temptation.
No temptation. That's right. That's right. Because his what we call Yetzer Hara has been effectively neutralized or even transformed into a second Yetzer Tov, and he experiences 0 temptation. Okay. Now, a lot of people were saying, well, is that what we're striving for? And I told you, no. It's not the goal. Not even the goal. Okay. We're just getting the lay of the land. We're just learning the parameters. So that's one kind of a person. A person who has no internal temptation, so there's nothing to overcome. All right. Now, I'm going to spoil the joke. I'm going to tell you the punchline. And if you were at my humor class on Wednesday, you know that I have a perverse thrill in doing that. Okay. Today we're going to learn about the rasha, 2 levels of rasha, which I don't want to translate as wicked person. And then in chapter 12, we're going to introduce the beinoni, and then we're going to have several chapters on the beinoni. We have 1 chapter on the tzaddik. That's the high level that we're never going to reach. We have 1 chapter on the rasha. That's the low level, which is easy to reach. You don't need a booklet. You don't need instructions to know how to do that. Right? And then we're going to have several chapters on the beinoni because, spoiler alert, but the name of the book is Sefer Shel Beinonim. It's not really Tanya, as we mentioned in the first class. We colloquially refer to it as Tanya, but really the Alter Rebbe called it Sefer Shel Beinonim, and the point of the book is to become this beinoni. But before we learn the beinoni, which is in between the tzaddik and the rasha, we have to learn the tzaddik and the rasha. So we're learning the extremes, okay? We learned the high extreme called the tzaddik last week. We're learning the low extreme called the rasha this week, and then we'll get into the beinoni, and that's basically our focus for the rest of the Sefer is who is this beinoni and how to become one. Okay? Make sense what we're doing? Okay? All right. So now we're going to learn about the rasha. Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11. Chapter 11 is bankruptcy.
Beinoni isn't the default?
No, beinoni is a default. That would be great to roll out of bed in the morning and already be a beinoni. Halavai. No, not a default
So you're
at all.
born nothing and you become either a tzaddik, a rasha, or a beinoni.
Well, you're born with the, either we said this last week, that you're born with the potential to become a tzaddik or not, in which case there's no point in pursuing it. And then
The true tzaddik is sprinkled throughout.
then the true tzaddikim are sprinkled throughout history, right? And then everyone else is born with the potential to be a beinoni, but the default is rasha. You let yourself go, boom.
Default is rasha.
Oh, sure.
So you have to work to become a beinoni.
Oh yeah, you got to work to become a beinoni. That's why the whole book is about the work you have to do to be a beinoni. In fact, if I had to write a 1-sentence book report on Tanya, I would say it is the book about all the work you have to do to become and maintain being a beinoni.
But you're saying that the goal is not even to try to become a tzaddik?
No, the goal is not to try to become a tzaddik.
That's kind of depressing.
Why is it depressing? You don't even know what Beinoni is yet. You're depressed that you can't be a tzaddik, but you didn't find out what a Beinoni is yet.
So when like
I think it's more depressing to tell someone that the goal is to become a tzaddik. Because remember what we defined a tzaddik as last week? As somebody who doesn't even have the temptation. So what you're telling me is the goal is I have to extricate the temptation from my heart. I'm not even allowed to have the temptation? How attainable is that? Not even allowed to have the urge, even if I overcome the urge?
so in a way Benoni is even on a higher level because he overcame.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, in a way the Beinoni is even a higher level because he's overcoming something. Yeah, the struggle. But let's not jump ahead of ourselves. Chapter 11. Okay, like I said, chapter 11 is bankruptcy. That's how I remember that chapter 11 is the rasha. It's my little mnemonic.
Oh, very.
Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11. Zeh luma zeh, one corresponding the other. You guys have heard that expression before. It's really originally from King Solomon. What?
Unfortunately, in that category.
Don't say that, please. Don't. No, we reject it. No, do not say that. Do not. Even if it's true. Calling people, saying that a room full of people are Rishoyim is like mentioning a woman's birthday. You just don't do it. You don't do it. Everyone knows. We all can. Her birth year. We could all do the math, but you don't say it. You don't say that. Come on. Okay. All right. So we're on chapter 11. Zeh luma zeh, one corresponding the other. You guys are familiar with that statement or that phrase. That's a phrase from Kehelis, from Shlomo Melech. One corresponding the other means that everything in this world is counterbalanced. We've learned this concept before, right? Okay. Rasha v'toivloi lumas tzadik v'raloi. You have bookends, so to speak, or mirror images, or the bizarro version, like they call it in Superman. You have the rasha v'toivloi, the rasha with a little bit of good in him, is the opposite of the tzadik v'raloi. Think about it. Tzaddik v'raloi is the tzaddik with a little bit of bad. And we explained what that meant. What we explained last week what that means. The opposite of that, the mirror image of that, is the rasha v'toivloi. Dahainu, in other words, what is this rasha v'toivloi? This rasha who has a little bit of good in him. Shahatoiv shebenafshehu elikis shebemeicher b'chol yamani shebelibai kafuf ubatul legabi ara mehaklipa shebechol asmali. The good in him, in his heart. I'm not going to get into the whole explanation why we talk about the right ventricle and the left ventricle. You can we spoke about that in chapter 9. But anyways, the good in him is subjugated, bent, literally, and nullified to the Ra. So he has good, but it's subjugated. What does that mean? That means he's a good guy. He's got a good heart. He meant well. But sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. It doesn't always come out that he does good. That's what it means. Let's explain it a little bit more.
Doesn't
What?
have to be subjugated to something.
That's what I said.
So what is it?
Tell me.
I missed it.
Say it again.
He has good, but it's subjugated.
Two.
That's the part.
What do we
It
say?
doesn't always come out that he does the good.
What? So the goodness of his godly soul is subjugated to the evil of his animal soul. What does this mean? This is also divided into tens of thousands of levels. Remember we said before about the tzaddik v'raloi that they're like endless levels of it. It's a very wide spectrum. Remember we said that last week?
Yeah.
Okay. So rasha v'toivloi is not just one category. There are lots of different shades of rasha v'toivloi. Be'inyan, and in what's the metric that distinguishes one from the other, one level of rasha v'toivloi from the other? Be'inyan, kamus ve'echos, the quantity and quality, habitul ukfifos hatoiv l'ra chas v'shalom, of the nullification of the good to the bad. In other words, the good is nullified to the bad. The question is, how much and in what way? How much meaning quantifiably, and in what way meaning in a qualitative sense. We're going to explain what all of this means. Okay, don't get nervous. So here's an example of a rasha v'tovloi. Okay, and you tell me if this sounds like a wicked person, because this is why I don't like to translate rasha as wicked, even though that's the conventional translation. You tell me if this sounds like an evil person. Answer is, I'll already tell you. No, it doesn't sound like an evil person. You know what it sounds like? It just sounds like a person whose ra is able to predominate over his toiv. He's a good person. He has toiv in him, but it doesn't always work out that way. Let's read further. Yesh mi shahakfifa v'habitl etzlei ma'at mizer. You have someone where the nullification of the toiv to the ra is minimal. Minimal. He has just a very light case of being a rasha. Minimal case. Okay. Va'af gam zois, and not only is it a minimal case, but furthermore, einay betemidus, it is not constant. It's not constant. V'loi tader, it's not frequent, leprokim kroivim, something that happens often. Ella rather leitim rechikim, it happens seldomly. Seldomly. Doesn't happen often. He's not drunk all the time. He relapses every few months. Yeah, I'm sober, except every few months I relapse. So it's not happening that often. What happens? Misgaber hara ala toiv, the evil, or maybe better translated, the selfishness, predominates over the toiv, or the selflessness, the altruism. V'kevish es ha'ira ketana hu aguf, and conquers the little city, the body. That was chapter 9, right? The parable of the little city, that each one of us is compared to a little city with two kings fighting for total domination. The animal soul and the godly soul both fighting for domination of our bodies. They both want self-expression, and they're fighting over the same person in order to get that self-expression. So one end of the range of this spectrum of rasha v'tovloi is a very light case where let's be practical. Let's say it as it is. He only misbehaves. I don't like it's a goyish word, but he only sins seldomly. He sins. He breaks. He violates God's law, but not often. Not often, because he's a good guy, and mostly he controls himself. But once in a while, the ra within him gets too strong, overbearing, and he makes the wrong choice. But it doesn't happen often. Doesn't happen often.
Is this a self-assessment?
Is it a self-assessment? No, right now we're not self-assessing. This is a totally theoretical idea right now. We're talking about a model. We're talking about a model. Don't take it personal yet.
You'll tell it.
Yeah, I'll let you know what. Okay. Laikulai ela miktsase levad. Also, you should know, when it does happen that the ra takes over, it's not even the whole body, it's just part of it. Where his body obeys his animal soul and becomes a vessel, a vehicle for that will. Levush becomes a garment, where one of the three soul garments will be lent to the expression of this selfish desire. Remember from chapter 4, the three soul garments? Thought, speech, action. Very good. So those are the three ways in which a soul expresses itself. either soul, godly or animal. They express themselves through thought, speech, and action. Those are the modes of self-expression. So what we're saying is this rasha, v'toivlai, first of all, he may seldomly sin. It's not a regular occurrence. Second of all, when that happens, it may not be in all of his soul garments, all of his modes of expression. It may only be in one of the three. He may not do anything, an actual deed. It might just be, a little lashon hara. Or it may be even active fantasizing, and we spoke about that, how willful thought, not the impulse that pops up in your mind that you push away, but willful thought where you actually deliberately sit and scheme or plot or even just fantasize about things that are not wholesome. So what we're saying is he's such a light case, this rasha v'toivlai, on one extreme end of the spectrum, that he rarely sins, and even when that happens, it's not even in all three of his soul garments. He goes a little more specifically. Dahainu, maybe he'll just do the action. You're saying, oh, he just did the action, that's the worst. I don't know, there's an argument to be made. Sometimes it's better just do it perfunctorily. Like we do mitzvahs perfunctorily. Yeah. Like you do the mitzvah and you don't even remember doing it. You just do the Aveda and you're not even present for it. So there's an argument to be said.
Without the actual thought, you mean?
Yeah, you're not even into it. Like afterwards, that's what it's all about. Oscar Wilde said the best way to get rid of a temptation is to give into it. Don't listen to Oscar Wilde, by the way.
Oh,
Okay. No. I said do not listen to Oscar Wilde. But no, please don't write it down.
What's an example of light?
Okay.
Hara?
Don't get distracted. Listen.
No, is that like?
Ask me after class. I have a lot of good light lashon hara to tell you. Okay, listen. Maybe he just does actions. He doesn't get so mentally into it. Okay? And also, another extenuating factor, they're not even grave sins. He didn't murder anybody. Maybe he ate before he made Havdalah on Motzei Shabbos.
oh boy, a major sin.
Shulchan Aruch says you're not allowed to do that. What?
Eat before Havdalah.
The example of an Aveda Kala? I hate to do that because it makes people think that that's the Aveda they should do. But a light sin, I said it's like a grave sin would be like murder.
Heavy, I thought we don't know what's
What?
He's telling us.
That's in another context. You're thinking about it in another context where he tells us in chapter 24, 25 that there's no gradation in sin. It's all one thing. But that's a totally different context. Okay. It's a problem. You have people who were through Tanya already, became Tanya experts. Okay. They say you'll never be jealous of your child or your student.
Oh, wow.
Deep. The Gemara says
We're
that.
honored.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe he just does action and not even serious actions. And maybe it's just in speech. Ledaber avak lashon hara v'leitzonis gavna. Maybe he's just speaking. It's not even real lashon hara. It's avak lashon hara. It's a categorization in halacha. It's not explicit lashon hara. It's like teetering on the edge of lashon hara. Or maybe he just speaks leitzonis, just telling silly, cynical jokes with no point. Not like last Wednesday's class where the jokes were very deep and they all had a point. Remember that? Every Truth has a little joke. Everyone was there. It's on YouTube. It's on soulwords.org. You can watch it again. Okay. Yeah, you got to watch it. Yeah. B'machshava levad. Or maybe he'll only sin in machshava, in thought. And again, I'm stressing, this doesn't mean the impulse for thought, like the image that just pops up in your head that you had no desire and no will over. We're talking about you sit down and for fun, for enjoyment, you fantasize about something. Oh, I would never kill him, but I would imagine torturing him. Well, don't tell me that's a mitzvah, okay? It's not a mitzvah. It's the opposite of a mitzvah. So maybe it's machshava levad. And he says here, hirhure aveda hakoshim aveda. In fact, in some senses, fantasizing about a sin can be more damaging than the sin itself.
Wow.
Yeah. There's different perspectives. Obviously, fantasizing about murder is going to be less impactful on the family of the murder victim,
True.
right?
Hopefully.
Than actually killing that person. But what we're talking about here is in some, what does it mean that it's kosher, that fantasizing about a sin can be more grave than doing the sin itself? What it means is, at least one explanation is that if you do it, so you did it once, it's done. If you think about it, you're like stewing in it. And it's with you, you're taking it with you all the time. Also, you do it, and action is the most external faculty of the three modes of expression. Thought is the most internal. So it's a matter of perspective. If you want to talk about the effect on the world, definitely action is more damaging to the world. But if you want to talk about the effect on yourself, negative thinking is more damaging to your own self, to your own soul, which you're also not allowed to damage. You're not allowed.
So, sorry, why is it a sin? Because basically you're only hurting yourself. You're not hurting.
Well, you're not allowed to hurt yourself.
You're not killing anyone.
Right, but that's the sin. You're not allowed to hurt yourself.
So it's an actual avera.
Yeah. But again, I want to distinguish. It's not that something pops up in your mind, something sinful, something outrageous, something shocking, appalling. That happens to everyone. And in fact, not to use clinical terms because I'm not qualified to do so, but in psychology they talk about intrusive thoughts and somebody who becomes obsessed with their own intrusive thoughts. Like the obsession with having the intrusive thoughts can become not more dysfunction. That is the dysfunction. So we're accepting the fact that we will have the impulse for all types of thoughts, and that's not sinful at all, and we're not responsible for that. How are you responsible for that? You're not responsible for that. But what we're talking about is it's a very important distinction here. Willful thought, where I've made a choice to think about this thing. Think of it as like the internal equivalent of just mindlessly scrolling on your phone, except you're mindlessly scrolling through your own thoughts. It's an activity. You've chosen to partake of that activity. So it's not like it's happening to you. You're not passive here. You're active, albeit in your own head. So it's not happening out there in the world. That's true. That's why I said from one perspective, action is much worse than thought, and from another perspective, thought can be more serious than action. But that's not the point, and I don't want anyone getting distracted. I want to make sure everyone understands the point here. The point is, we're talking about a very, very light case of rasha v'toivlai, where his infractions are very infrequent, doesn't happen often. It is not necessarily grave sins that he's involved in. Could be relatively what we call light infractions. And it's not in all of his soul garments. It's maybe in one soul garment and not the others. In other words, we have a lot of extenuating factors here to argue that his case of being a rasha is a rather mild one.
How does Judaism view premeditated crime?
Okay, I'm not getting, no. I want everyone to understand one thing. Do you understand what we're doing right now? What are we doing? We're defining the parameters of the rasha v'toivlai. What?
Can there be different spectrum within rasha v'toivlai, like different
Spectrums within spectrums within spectrums? Yeah, why not? Sure. Sure. Okay. Nuance is everything. All right. Let's just close this thought here. V'gam im einoi mahar ba'avera la'aseisa ela be'inyan zivug zachar nekeva ba'olam. Even if, see, I cleaned it up. I said he was fantasizing about murdering somebody. The Alter Rebbe is a little bit more real. I'm timid. The Alter Rebbe says it. He says, even if the person is not, when he talks about sinning with your thoughts, he says, sinning with your thoughts could mean not even that you're plotting how to do a sin. That's obviously sinful. Like the thoughts that you put into how to do a sin are part of the sin. But here he even says, fantasizing about erotic thoughts. That's the example that he gives. And he explains why that's not okay. Sha'aver al azharas ha'torah, because he is transgressing the Torah's warning, v'nishmarta mikol davar ra, shlo yahar bayim chulu. Don't think about not good things, because he doesn't finish the sentence. He says chulu, which means etc. But it means that if you fantasize during the day, you may have problems at night.
This begs the question, are you allowed to fantasize about your spouse?
Then that goes in the category of planning on a mitzvah.
Oh, good.
Everyone understands what we mean? A person might have problems at night?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a biological
We understand.
issue, okay? It's pertaining to men, correct. And by the way, not to be sexist, but I do believe that a lot of this stuff is very different for men and for women. Like in chapter 7, remember, we spoke about different permissible things that if you do it indulgently, it becomes really not good. And we used eating as one example, but also marital intimacy was another example in chapter 7. I don't want to get into a whole discussion of this, but I gave a class last week or the week before, I don't remember, to married men.
Yeah.
And I told you about this last week. It was 2 weeks ago. So,
Yeah, very good.
oh yeah, that's right. Love gives,
We
lust
love that
takes.
line,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So I told the men basically not to be so selfish.
Correct.
But I should say there are differences. There are very... Okay, here's a 30-second micro vort. When they were building the Mishkan, the sanctuary, the women donated mirrors, and Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to accept the mirrors because the mirrors had an origin story. Back in Mitzrayim, when the men were so emotionally broken because of slavery, they didn't want to procreate, they didn't want to be intimate with their wives, and therefore there would be no further Jewish generations. The women used to use these mirrors to look into the mirrors and beautify themselves so they could seduce their husbands. And when they left Egypt and they were in the desert and they went to donate these mirrors, so Moshe saw it. He was like, no, this doesn't belong in the Mishkan. The Mishkan is a house to Hashem. It's totally holy. This is like I understand why you did what you had to do, but let's not bring it in here. And the Medrash says Hashem told Moshe, accept the mirrors, because these donations are more beloved to me than any of the other donations. The whole sikha from the Rebbe about it, but basically how the women had the ability to elevate that whole thing and make it totally holy. So a lot of these messages are, I think, somewhat gender specific. So I don't want to bring a whole bunch of guilt and shame and neurosis upon innocent people. But at the same time, I'm not going to skip the line. I'm going to read what it says here. And by the way, when I learned this with men, I think one of the things I emphasize is that the Alter Rebbe is so I guess what I would say is he's a lot of people, they have struggles and then they feel so they have such self-hatred about it that it causes a lot of confusion.
About the struggle or about?
That they even have a struggle, yeah.
Have a struggle.
So I always point out, look, the Alter Rebbe, when he wants to give an example of thinking that is not appropriate thinking, he says very clearly, he says erotic fantasies. Like, the Alter Rebbe is not shying away from it. He's not shying away from it. So, like he's saying, this is the human condition, of course. Okay. All right, let's continue. Another example. Shehi shas hakosh lasik b'Torah v'hu mefana libe levatala. It's a good time for learning Torah, and instead he's checking his email for the 20th time today. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. Kidetnan ba'aves, like it says in Pirkei Avos, haner b'layla chulu mefana libe chulu. When a person is awake at night and he empties his heart, meaning he doesn't learn Torah, doesn't use that time. What is the night for when it's quiet? It's for learning Torah. Is there any other use for the night times other than learning Torah? Instead, he uses it for foolishness. So that would be a misuse of the garment of thought. What happens is the inner Ra predominates, rises up, and takes over enough to manage to get him to do something he shouldn't do. And when I say do, I don't necessarily mean a physical action. Doing can encompass not only action, but speech, and even active, willful thought. And again, I stress active, willful thought. Okay. At any rate, the point is, this rasha v'toivlai is a pretty good guy. 99.9% of the time. Once in a while, he does an Aveda, and it's not even a big Aveda, and sometimes it's not even anything more than just fantasizing. That's it. That's it. But here's what he wants you to know. The definition of a rasha, again, that's why I don't translate it as a wicked person, because it doesn't sound very wicked. All a rasha means is somebody who doesn't have 100% behavioral control. That's all it means. He doesn't have 100% behavioral control. So if you have a pilot who crashes 1 out of 1,000 times, that's a pretty good average, but no one's going to fly with him. You don't call that safe. Like in baseball, a batting average in the 300s, that means 70% of the time you strike out and you're considered a great hitter. But a pilot, if he crashes 1 out of 1,000 times, that's not a good average. Yeah.
So what's the difference between him and the Beinoni?
What's the difference between him and the Beinoni? Should I spoil the suspense? Okay. The Beinoni is never going to lose behavioral control even once. So I gave away the excitement.
Yeah, but I think he has a bad rap. the
Who?
Rasha V'Tovlai. I think he's a pretty good
Rasha
guy.
V'Tovlai does not
Why
get a
do you
bad
have
rap
to-
here.
Why
We're
do
not.
you have to say Russia? Take that out.
No. Tippy's saying, why do we have to call him a Russia? Like, the guy's not a Russia, so stop calling him a Russia.
Right.
Okay. So you remind me of the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Wow.
Somebody came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and said that his Rebbe, another Chassidic Rebbe, was asked. The Rebbe asked, what was he saying? What were his divrei Torah? What teachings did he give over? So this Chassid from this other group said that my Rebbe was saying how the Gemara says, "Afilo Pashi Yisrael Mamalei mitzvahs kirimain," that even the wanton sinners of Israel are full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate is full of seeds. So my Rebbe was saying, it's not really doesn't make sense. If they're wanton sinners, how can they be full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate is full of seeds? And the Rebbe said, I have almost the same exact question on that same passage in Talmud, except my question is, if they're full of mitzvahs, how could the Talmud call them sinners? So you're saying, how could they be called Rishoyim? Okay, and what I'm saying is, let's, for at least the context of this class, change the connotation of the word rasha. The connotation of rasha is not a diabolical, scheming, nasty, hateful person. The connotation of rasha in this class is a good guy who 99.9% of the time is doing good stuff. Yeah. Yeah. What?
You said that the Benoni does not use behavioral control,
Yes.
providing the assignment. What is it only?
So you guys are getting ahead of yourselves. So you asked what's the difference between this and a Beinoni, a rasha v'tovla and a Beinoni, and I said, should I ruin the suspense? He said yes. I said okay. The Beinoni doesn't lose behavioral control even once. So now you're saying, oh, now the follow-up question. Then what's the difference between this and the tzaddik? And what is the difference between the difference? But we're getting way ahead. But I'll answer your question. The difference between the Beinoni and the tzaddik is that a tzaddik, it's not that he doesn't lose behavioral control. There's nothing to lose control to. There's no struggle to begin with. So basically we have a tzaddik who has no struggle. The rasha who is struggling, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And the Beinoni who's successfully struggling all the time at the level of behavior, meaning he cannot suppress the initial urge. That will come to him, but on the level of behavior, he's able to exert control. Okay, but I want to continue here. I want to continue because there's a very important aspect of the rasha v'tovla we have not discussed yet, and that is the rasha v'tovla. Is he a bad guy?
No.
He's not a bad guy. So I want to ask you a question. How do you think he feels about his lapses when he does the wrong thing? How do you think he feels? I know when he's doing it,
He has guilt.
of course he has guilt. Of course he has guilt.
Yeah.
Because he's not a bad guy.
Right.
Okay, so he did a stupid thing. But at some point, maybe even immediately after, he's going to feel bad about it. So let's continue here. Yeah.
Is it Tanya rasha and Haggadah rasha the same?
No. It's its own lexicon.
That's a good question. That's a good.
No.
That's a
It's
really
its-
good.
This is Tanya has its own lexicon. Okay. So where do we get up to? Sheba'achas mikol eila v'chayetze b'hen nikra rasha b'eis hahi. Any of these examples of lapses, even very minor lapses, he's called a rasha. Sheharasha b'nafshe gever by mislabish b'guvye machtia metame. Yeah, we said that. That the ra is strong enough to make him sin. Okay. Now, the guilt. Va'achar kach, after the lapse, gever bayatev shebenafshe elokis, the good, the latent good, the native good that's in him, that was always there the whole time. In fact, it was being violated at the time when he was going against Hashem's will. Because the good is trapped there in him. It's being schlepped along. It just wasn't strong enough to stop him. And now the good sort of wakes up and says, Oy vey, what's happened here? What have we done? So what happens? Umischaret. He feels regret. He feels regret. He feels remorse. Umevakish mechilam v'slicha ma'Hashem. And he asks Hashem for forgiveness and pardon. And by the way, the Alter Rebbe makes sure you know, V'Hashem yislach lai, and Hashem forgives him. God is forgiving. Im shav b'tshuva haroy al pi Atzas Chachmenu Zal, B'Shleisha Chaluke Kapara Shahaya Rebbe Yishmael, Doirish Chulu, Kameshin is Mamakam Acher, provided he does tshuva in the appropriate way, as delineated by the Bryce of Rebbe Yishmael, which is explained at length elsewhere. In other words, in the first chapter of Yigeras HaTshuva. This book, the first volume of Tanya, is called Sefer Shel Beinanim. The second volume is called Shar Yichud V'Amunah. The third volume is called Yigeras HaTshuva. In the first chapter of the third volume, which is called Yigeras HaTshuva, the book of repentance, the letter of repentance, it enumerates the three different levels of pardon or of atonement. But we're not going to get into them here. All we're saying is that there are requirements for doing proper tshuva, and provided he follows the requirements for doing proper tshuva, he will be forgiven. And that's all we need to know. Okay. So, basically, what have we described? This rasha v'tovlei. He's a good guy who wants to do good and generally does good.
Okay.
But once in a while, he messes up. And then after he messes up, at some point, sooner or later, sometimes sooner than later, he feels awful. That's called a rasha v'tovlei.
So he sounds like a regular person.
He sounds like a regular person, yeah. Yeah. So remember at the beginning of class we were talking about default? It's basically the default of any regular, decent person. Default meaning if you let yourself go and you just be natural, au natural, that's what's going to come out. And of course it's a spectrum. There's a spectrum because some people are going to be like this extreme example that we gave where he barely ever sins and it's only light sins and it's only in one garment of the soul and not in all three garments. And then at the other end of that rasha v'tovlei spectrum, there could be someone who's sinning all the time and it's serious sins.
And what does Tanya call that rasha?
He's still in the same spectrum, rasha v'tovlei.
It seems unfair.
Very good question. It seems unfair. Why? What's going to happen to you if you're in that?
I mean,
It's unfair.
No.
What?
I mean, the tshuva doesn't bring him back to where he was like when he was first
But that's where he always was.
If you do it and the next time he,
If he maintains the tshuva, yeah, sure.
He could become a Benoni.
Sure, that's the whole point of the book is to do tshuva and become a Beinoni. Yeah, of course, that's the whole point of the book. But you're asking, well, what about the extreme case where the guy is sinning most of the time and he's doing serious avedas and it's all three garments? Same spectrum. That's also rasha v'tovlei. Rasha v'tovlei is a very wide spectrum.
so if I murder someone,
No, don't. Don't do it.
I'm going to try not to.
Okay.
But I'm going to try not
Okay.
So if I murder someone
Yeah. Why do you say it again? Okay.
and somebody else just occasionally slips, they say a little lashon hara.
So yeah, there's a murderer and there's a guy who spoke lashon hara one time. Yeah.
So we both.
They're both in the same category.
What?
But what's the
A
difference?
murder?
But what's the difference? What do you care?
I can't actually.
What do you care if a Rolls Royce and a Yugo are both called cars?
Plus,
It's a wide category.
as far as I'm concerned, that's an 8th grade.
A Chihuahua and a Saint Bernard are both dogs. It's a wide category. It's a very wide category. What do you care?
When you describe what the rasha v'ralo is, it'll make more sense that, you know, we'll
Possibly.
have a bigger picture, because right now we don't know what a rasha v'ralo is.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's find out. Yeah, I agree with you. We don't know what a rasha v'ralo is. Very good point. We don't even. What's this rasha v'ralo? So I want to tell you something. You know what's? Every time I learn Tanya with people and I ask them, well, what do you think at this point? So, what do you think a rasha v'ralo is? You know what they always say?
He doesn't have the guilt, probably.
You guys are so good. No one ever says that. No one says that. This is the first time this ever happened. Everybody says
What did she say?
no guilt. She said no guilt. Usually what people say is Rosh Hashanah must mean he does worse sins. And actually that's not the criterion that differentiates the Rosh Hashanah from the Rosh Hashanah. It's not the degree of his sins. You're going to see. Very good. It's the guilt.
Still has some good.
Okay, it still has some... You guys are very good. Okay, wait, watch. Okay, watch. Okay, you guys ready? V'yesh mi shara geva b'yeser. There is somebody. Oh, hold on a second. I'm sorry. We're still in the Rosh Hashanah. I'm sorry. Okay, you got me so excited. I jumped ahead. Rosh Hashanah. Okay, we're still in the rasha v'toivlei, and we're talking about the other extreme of the spectrum, rasha v'toivlei. V'yesh mi shara geva b'yeser, u'mislabshim b'y kol shloish levushim shel hara, u'machtiei ba'averes chamures yeser, u'bitim krevim yeser. So then you have, on the other side of the spectrum of rasha v'toivlei, someone who sins more often, he sins more grave sins, and it affects more of the garments of the soul. Ach ben Saim, however, in the interim, in between his sinning, when he can manage to fit it in, mischaret, he does have regret. So if he has regret, then he's definitely still in the category of rasha v'toivlei. He still has good in him, which regrets the bad actions. U'boim lo hihure tshuva mebechinas hatov shemenafshay. He gets little hankerings, he gets little flashes of tshuva thoughts from the good that's in his soul, which is able to gain strength once in a while. But it's not strong enough, the good in him is not strong enough to help him, to put him over the hump and to actually make that behavioral victory. He's not able to actually abandon his sin. This is why our sages of blessed memory said, the wicked are full of remorse. What does it mean, the wicked are full of remorse? It means your average, quote-unquote, wicked person is just a good guy who messes up and feels bad about it. Listen to this. Listen to what he says. This is the majority of wicked people. They still have good in them. So I'm asking you to do me a favor, do yourselves a favor. Don't get so triggered by the word rasha. We don't need to have it connote an evil, loathsome person. Change your picture of a rasha. A rasha is a good guy, a good gal, who just doesn't have 100% behavioral control. It's a pilot who crashes 1 out of 1,000 times. Okay? Yeah. It's the addict who relapses once a year. It's not 100%. All right, now, let's get to the rasha v'ralei. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Ach mi she'enai mischaret la'ela. However, one who never has remorse, and he doesn't have any thought of tshuva, nikra rasha v'ralei. That would be called rasha v'ralei. What? Now let's talk about the spiritual mechanics or dynamics of what's happened to this guy. Because we know the mechanics of regret. The mechanics of regret are that there's good in you, and that good is allergic to the bad in your behaviors, and it's like having an allergic reaction. So how come this guy's not having an allergic reaction? He doesn't have a soul? Of course he has a soul. But what happened to he has a soul. What happened to his soul? So watch what he says. Only the selfish, animalistic survival impulse is left within him. It pushed down the goodness so much that the goodness flew away, departed. But it didn't disappear. Where is it? It stands in a hovering sort of way above him. And when we say hovering and above, we're talking about spiritual things. So obviously, I don't mean spatially in a sense of it, like a little is it a foot above his head? Is it 2 feet above it? What it's saying is, when I say inside and outside about spiritual things, we're not talking about like the coffee's in the cup, like physical. Spiritually, when I say inside or outside, what I mean is, what does it mean that his soul is in him? It means it's integrated enough into his consciousness that it's a part of his experience. And that's a rasha v'toivlei, that he has a soul which is part of his experience. Unfortunately, it's not strong enough a part of his experience to prevent him from ever sinning, but it's definitely there, and therefore he's allergic to the sins that he does, and he feels bad about them afterwards. The rasha v'raloi also has a soul. It's just not in him, meaning it's not integrated into his conscious experience. When we say it's makif, that it's hovering, what we mean is he has a soul, but he's not in touch with it. And it doesn't really inform his experience of life. So he just goes through life totally like an animal, like survival impulse. There's no morality, amoral. Like a lion feels no regret for killing an antelope. So that's this rasha v'raloi. Just does what he does, and it's all justified, and there's no thought of introspection or stock taking. Yeah?
So what's the difference between him,
The rasha v'raloi.
the rasha v'raloi,
Yeah.
who is now connected to Hashem, it sounds, by a slither, and someone who has kares?
You're asking a question about Kaddish. That's a very interesting question. Okay. Let me think if I can even attempt to answer that question sufficiently in the 0 time that we have remaining. For practical purposes, let's say it's very similar. Let's say it's very similar.
Unless you do the 3 cardinal sins, right?
Okay, I don't want to, but for the purposes of our chapter, let's say it's a very similar phenomenon.
But does
Okay.
he even feel the pain of that?
No,
No.
no,
He's fine.
he's fine.
His
this
soul,
like a
he doesn't even know.
Yes.
Okay, so here's
You're helping us so much.
I don't like to use clinical terms. No, I don't like to label, that's for sure also. Yes, I don't like to label. But also, I don't like to use clinical terms. I'm not qualified to use these terms. When you say, is he a sociopath?
No.
I'm not a mental health professional. I can't use that word. But in a metaphorical, colloquial sense, you might say, yeah, a sociopath.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But they're all walking
Yeah.
planet Earth.
yeah.
From Tanakh, would you say that Esau would fall in that category? Haman? Esau? No, but
Hitler.
Who would you say are examples of rasha v'raloi?
Esau had some good things. They say Esau had
Yeah.
I think more Haman.
Tzaddik, right? So he had.
You need to picture somebody.
Hitler.
No, I'm just curious.
A rasha v'raloi is a Jew.
Oh, so I have.
It's a Jew who has a nefesh elokis. Yeah,
I have a question. So what is a secular Jew
yeah.
who is a normal, good person but was never connected to any of our religious world and has no concept to it?
Okay, so the question is.
Is that a rasha v'raloi?
So the question is, what about, because on the video they can't always hear, especially from the back of the room. Your question is, what about a secular Jew who has no concept of Torah mitzvahs? So they eat on Yom Kippur. You didn't give that example, but I'm giving an example. They eat on Yom Kippur and they don't flinch. They think nothing of it. So is that a rasha v'raloi? And here's what I want to tell you. No, of course not. Because you can't test them in an area that they're completely ignorant of. Test them in something that they know about. Like, test them in an area of social justice, bein adam lechaveroi, and see if they're able to mercilessly step on somebody and not care. If they can, then maybe they are a rasha v'raloi. But if they can't, even if they eat on Yom Kippur and they don't put on tefillin or they don't like Shabbos candles, that's just because of ignorance. But you're not talking about a person who has no sense of shame and no sense of decency.
So they're just like Russia Vitullo even.
Yeah, just like us.
Yeah.
Just regular.
Yeah, regular good people. Yeah. Yeah, regular good people who need to do better. Yeah? I want to wrap it up in 1 second. Yeah?
So how do we help a rasha v'raloi connect to his hovering soul?
Ooh, wow. Wow. That's a very compassionate, beautiful question. How can we help this rasha v'raloi connect to his hovering soul?
Internal, or it needs to come from him?
Yeah.
If he ever had like a fearful race situation?
Yeah, well,
He has to want it.
Yeah. Okay, this is a fantastic question. How should we treat this person? And I guess my answer to your question, and I want to wrap up right now, is first and foremost, stay safe, because a rasha v'raloi is a dangerous person. So first and foremost, I want you to stay safe. If you're safe, that you should be as kind as you possibly can be, because we still have a mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, and maybe it'll bring them back, and maybe it won't, and even if it doesn't bring them back, you did the right thing. Okay, let me wrap up with the last line here. V'lochein Amr Razal. Listen, this is such a beautiful way for the Alter Rebbe to finish a chapter that's about Rishoyim, about wicked people. Listen to this beautiful way that we're talking about the dregs, we're talking about the lows of the low, the rasha v'ralai, the guy who does evil and all he has within him on an accessible level is evil, right? He doesn't even feel regret. And listen to how the Alter Rebbe ends this chapter. He says, therefore our sages say, Akol be asara shchinta sharyo. On every group of 10 Jews, the Shechina rests. And he doesn't spell it out explicitly, but what he means is they make no qualifications in that statement. In other words, a minion of Rishoyim would still have the Shechina. Why? Because the Shechina is resting on them. It's not in them, it's hovering. And they have that. Even though they are Rishoyim, and even a rasha v'raloi level, the Shechina is still with them. And you're saying it's not fair. What do you mean it's not fair?
I don't think
It's not fair.
because
So you want to punish them, but
yeah, there's victims here. Yeah,
but
it is.
who says that that's good for the victim to punish the rasha v'raloi? That what, they should be even more divorced from God? They should persist.
Amongst Hashem and His people, how can the victim?
Who says they feel safe among Hashem and His people? They probably feel the good people, the victim.
I'm saying everyone.
How do you know who's a rasha v'raloi? Okay, one last question.
You have
Yeah.
experience of rasha v'raloi.
What you have a last question?
You're not supposed to judge people to be rasha v'raloi.
I can't agree.
Any? Are we done? We need any more clarification? I see everybody's triggered by the discussion of rasha v'raloi. Everybody's thinking about their favorite sociopath, psychopath, narcissist.
Correct.
Okay, and wishing that they will get their comeuppance. But you know what?
Just be judging ourselves right.
There's a.
Okay, that too.
Anything else?
We do.
Okay, one last question. Yeah.
We are, but there's
Okay.
still these other people out there. We're not saying we're judging.
What?
The rasha is also a sometime,
Right.
but a rasha v'raloi.
Okay, so the question is, this is the last question. Is a rasha v'raloi a constant thing? So here's what I'm going to answer you. Because as you accurately, collectively, you accurately answered that the difference between a rasha v'tevil and a rasha v'raloi is not frequency of sin or severity of sin, but rather the absence of guilt. Okay, so in theory, this is mind-blowing if you think about it. There could be a rasha v'tevil who sins more frequently than a rasha v'raloi, but that rasha v'tevil feels bad about it each time, and the rasha v'raloi will never feel bad.
But you could also have someone who's a rasha, but he's a good guy, and for the most part he feels guilty.
Yeah.
So let's say he holds a grudge towards someone because of
Yeah.
so he doesn't feel guilty holding the grudge because it's justified. So in that
But he feels guilty about other things.
Yeah.
right. So in that case,
So he's a rasha v'tevil. If he's capable of guilt,
okay.
he's a rasha v'tevil. You're asking, well, what if he has this one aveda that he constantly does and he doesn't feel bad about it? He's a mumar le'inyan le'davar echad. Okay, he's still a rasha v'tevil. Okay, what we're talking about is when we say rasha v'raloi, we don't mean that there's a thing that he never feels bad about. We're saying there's nothing that he ever feels bad about. He's incapable of guilt. He's incapable of that self-awareness. Why? Because the okay, are we good? Are we good? Okay. What? How do you move? Okay, well, you know, Mitzvah we'll continue next week. Okay, let's continue next week. Okay.